everybody. This is Kristin Savory of the Thyroid Podcast, where I'm bringing you more information to help you support your thyroid and balance your hormones. Because at the end of the day, wouldn't it be great if you could just feel your very best? Pretty simple. Every time I do one of these podcasts, I like to bring you information and talk to people that can give you at least one golden nugget. And today I have a friend and a dear colleague of mine, Sue Van Raes of Boulder Nutrition, who is sure to bring us more than one golden nugget. Sue has been a pioneer in the nutrition field for women for many years. And Sue, just the other day, I was kind of working back in my mind how long we've known each other. And I kind of put together, it's been about 20 years.
I think so. Way back to when you were in acupuncture school.
Yeah, I first met you when I was in acupuncture school. And we've seen each other through so many phases in life. Relationships, kids, and dogs, all sorts of stuff has come up in that 20 years. And I'm thrilled to have you on the podcast today because over the time, I've learned so much from you, and I think it's going to be great to share with my audience.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It's always wonderful to connect with you, but I love to share our joint passion for health and wellness and a lot of the other things we've done together. So this is a great pleasure for me.
Yeah. So, Sue, you know what my tribe is. I mean, I love to work with women that have thyroid issues and hormonal issues, and it happens all the time, right? Women that are in this category, there's this big over-looming elephant in the room, and it all kind of comes down to food. Everybody is kind of like either beating themselves up or trying something new or wondering what to eat. And food becomes this big, huge topic all the time. And so I'm kind of curious in terms of, some of the foundational pieces through Boulder Nutrition, what you found to be helpful in terms of working with women in regards to food.
Well, the real foundation of my work, I would say, is really about turning ourselves back to ourselves. And really one of the most complicated aspects of eating in this time in the world is that there is so much information and we are constantly being, shown and swayed, and there's so many diet trends out there. And what I've noticed is that they really pull us out of listening to our own body's wisdom. And so what ends up happening is we try all these things from working from the outside in, and it leaves us, not always sure what's working for our bodies and what's not, rather than my approach, which I really find to be a little bit more workable in this world of being so complex and so confusing, which is listening and working from the inside out. And sort of dropping a lot of the regiments and the trends and the restrictions around not only what we eat, but also kind of identifying ourselves with a certain eating style. Because often when we're identified with that eating style, no matter what it is, even if it's a really powerful, healing, eating style, we often are still kind of stuck in the parameters of that, and we don't always have the opportunity to pay attention to what we need and what we are best how we're best able to feed ourselves and care for ourselves.
Yeah, what I hear from you in that is that there's this way that a lot of us can go into this like intellectualizing place, right? And kind of want to know and kind of create this boundary around the whole thing and kind of approach food from that way. And what I hear you doing is that you're trying to encourage people to get more towards a feeling mode.
Absolutely. I truly believe that, we are primal when it comes to eating, and the intuitive wisdom that we are seeking is truly there. It's just that it's layered with so much other stuff. We often can't find it, or we've never really used it. And we've navigated through this world of eating with so many other, tools that we've kind of adopted over the years, like overly thinking about, how it's going to appear, or we often are, looking at the research and we're doing it from more of a heady perspective rather than like a mind-body perspective. I find that people often are looking to be part of something and feeling that need for connection and community, which is such a primal human need. And yet when we're seeking it through identifying ourselves in a certain way around eating, it can often get really confusing, and not always serve our health in the most, highest way, I guess I would say.
Right. Sue, whenever I start talking to you about food, I think about one of these basic sort of tenets that I've heard you talk about for years. And I even use it in my practice too, because I think it's been so helpful for people. And it's this idea that, and especially in regards to food, that when we start talking about food, everybody goes to this place of restriction. Most people go towards, well, I shouldn't eat this anymore. I shouldn't eat that anymore. I shouldn't eat this anymore. And what you really taught me and what I use is this whole idea of adding in. Can you talk a little bit about that? I love this piece.
Absolutely. I also love this, and it came actually from a yogic principle or teaching that I was given many years ago. And the yoga teacher that I was studying with at the time, she said to me, humans, we do better when we add in instead of take away or subtract. And I think the adding in gives us an opportunity to kind of fill our lives with all of this good food or good, healthful habits or lifestyle choices. And then what doesn't really align with us starts to really become noticeable or prevalent, and it crowds out the habits that we're doing or the foods we're eating or the whatever we're doing in our lives that isn't really working, because it starts to really not match up. When we do it the other way around, I notice that, it's very common to feel like clenched when we're told to take something away, especially if it's something we love, like a comfort food or our favorite cookie recipe or whatever that is. We often feel like sort of restricted and rebellious and maybe a little agitated, and we almost cling to that thing even more, and it's not really as sustainable. I feel like the last thing I want people to do is leave my office feeling overwhelmed, kind of bummed out and hopeless that, oh, my life, all my pleasure is going to be taken away, or now I have to restrict. And most of the time people can't succeed at that anyways. It takes such a strong will to restrict all the time. And so for sustainable pleasure, sustainable health, sustainable results, I really find that the opposite, adding in to crowd out, is a much better approach.
Yeah, and what is so fun about this whole adding in thing is that it might be food, but it might not be. It could be taking a walk. It could be knitting. It could be calling some girlfriends. It could be trying skydiving for whatever it is. It doesn't have to be around food, but just the more joyful experiences, the more we lean towards feeling good, all this other stuff tends to fall away.
Well, that's really interesting that you brought that up, because my podcast is actually called Satiate.
Yeah.
And it's really all about satiating ourselves in our lives, so that we don't have to only satiate ourselves with our eating. And I find that so many people are tired and stressed and overly busy, and they're not giving themselves enough downtime, enough fun, enough joy, enough life force to balance everything out. So our lives can start to feel like 100% a to-do list, from the time we wake up in the morning until the time we go to bed at night. And the only pleasure that we get all day is in our eating. And so that can actually be a place where we end up sabotaging ourselves or acting out to ourselves, or, just it's the only pleasure we have. So it can become like a crutch. And when we start to have more personal fulfillment, when we start to be satiated in our lives, all of a sudden that eating piece, it becomes less of the crutch and more of, what it's supposed to be, which is it's in its functionality and still pleasurable, but not the only way we're getting it.
Yeah, or less of that place where we act out, right? We're either good or we're bad, or there's some kind of charge around it, right?
Absolutely. One of my clients said this a couple years ago, and it stuck with me. She said, I find that I both reward myself with food, and I also punish myself with food.
Yeah.
And it's interesting when they're that close together in the juxtaposition. And she was even actually talking about pizza. And so pizza was her reward. And when she felt like frumpy, or she didn't have a good day with eating, or she felt like she was, being hard on herself, pizza could also be when she threw her hands up in the air and just said, who cares? I'm just going to eat pizza. And it was interesting how you can have both of those happening at the same time. Whereas, I think when we're more in alignment with our eating, we can make a conscious choice. And it's not to say it's doesn't have any emotionality to it. Obviously we're emotional beings, but that we can at least just have a bit more of consciousness in the choosing. And that can make a really big impact on the greater picture.
Well, and I think that other piece too that you said, right? Like not only alignment with our eating, but alignment with ourselves, right? Isn't that where it really comes back to, right? So that we're not using, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, honestly, I believe that our health is so much more than our eating. It's partially like what we're eating, of course, and it's also a lot to do with how we're eating. But then, of course, there's so many other aspects, in the primary foods that I would, that I'm always kind of considering with myself and with my work, which are things like our relationships, how we move our bodies, what we do for pleasure, how we manage our money, our spiritual life, all these different aspects of living that are very important to feel fulfilled in our lives within our eating and outside of our eating.
Yeah, it's all connected, isn't it?
It's all connected.
It's all connected. So, Sue, this one piece around, that was my puppy just then. Sorry about that.
Mine is sleeping.
Mine is not. So both Sue and I, like I said at the beginning, that we've shared multiple phases of life. We're both in the puppy phase right now, and we both have puppies that are under a year old who are keeping us busy and chewing up furniture and all sorts of funny things. So, Sue, I wanted to ask you this as well. So this adding in piece is a really big piece of your work. And then you mentioned this bit. What are the other primary foods that are needed in terms of satiating, that whole satiating piece? Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. I think that for everyone, they're going to be a little different, and it's almost like the different domains of our life that need attention and that fill us up. And, there's some pretty primal ones that are in there. I mean, I believe that we all need connection, and that's a big one. And that includes our primary relationship, but it can also include our community, our neighbors, our friends, our sisters, our greater community in general, and how well we relate in that context. I also believe that, there's a lot of energizing and healthful benefits that come from movement. We're both in the yoga world. We both love to be outside. We both love to move our bodies. So I know you can relate to that one. But that is really obviously a big impactful domain that influences how we feel in our biochemistry and in our brain chemistry, but also, of course, our health overall. I believe that, how we think is probably one of the most integral pieces of our health, because, you know, really in a sense, like our inner world and what we're listening to all day long around the script that we play in our thoughts, it's so important. And, you know, most of us are our own worst critic, and we can easily get stuck in these loops of guilt and shame and judgment that is often worst pointing at ourselves. And it's hard when we're hearing that all day long, because, you know, it starts to wear us down and it becomes so automatic. It's hard for us. It's like, it's a habit, but it's also like a neural pathway where we have to really work to change the quality of our thoughts and go from maybe more, you know, a more of a negative thought pattern to more of a positive, uplifting, like, you know, kind of supportive thought pattern. And that in itself is like such a deep part of our human experience that if we can really upgrade, it makes such a big difference in our happiness.
You know, I would love that if somebody came to me, you know, because so often a lot of people will come and they'll be like, you know, I'd really like to do a cleanse. And I'm like, okay, before we do a food cleanse, let's get real and let's kind of do this emotional plane cleanse. Let's get really honest with ourselves, because it's all playing out over here when the root of it is actually way over here.
Absolutely. And I think you and I both, I remember brainstorming this with you years ago when I wanted to do a mind cleanse for a program. And we ended up kind of deciding to call it the Self-Love Challenge because it just, I think it was a bit more of an appealing name. But really, if we could cleanse our minds, and we can, you know, with certain yogic practices or being outside or talking to a friend or doing meditation or various things like that. I mean, all of these ancient traditions are geared to cleanse our mind, but oftentimes we get so busy we don't even think about the opportunity or the necessity of how important and integral that is. So I did create the Self-Love Challenge, and it was really fun for me to write because it was like daily practices, just little tiny things to add in that you could include in your health and wellness plan, and maybe try some for the first time. I mean, I know for me, these little pieces of self-care, I spend so much time every day that they're automatic. But when I remember a couple of years ago, I added up how much time I spend doing some of these practices on a daily basis. And I mean, we're talking like a few hours a day.
Wow.
And they're not all in a row. And it doesn't feel like this big thing where I have to go and, you know, sit on my meditation cushion for 3 hours. But I might journal in the morning for 30 minutes or 15 minutes. I might go on an hour-long walk or, you know, do some kind of outdoor exercise. I might spend some time on my yoga mat. I might take a nice long bath at the end of the day. I might do a gratitude practice before I fall asleep with the, you know, while I'm like literally all these things, they start to become are automatic, and they're not on my to-do list. They're just basic ways that I take care of myself, but they do begin to add up time-wise, and also they add up impact-wise.
Retrain the brain, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what I hear from that too is just like keep adding in what feels good, retraining, so that we're not always constantly working out of patterns that aren't necessarily serving us anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting, like being fluid with all of these things, I think is so important, especially for women, because for me, I know when I have like a bunch of rules for myself around my eating or around these self-care practices that I do, they start to feel like a burden. And I noticed that, I think I signed up for something years ago where I had to do like, you know, like a 40-day meditation or something like that. And, you know, I was dreading it, you know, halfway through because it was such an obligation. And as soon as I gave myself permission to flow with it and to create whatever kind of meditative experience I was in the mood for, if that meant, you know, going on a walk and just being on a walking meditation or writing in my journal or chanting or, you know, whatever it was, it just became so much more. Now I look forward to it because I don't have any rules around it.
You had to loosen up that rigidity. You had to kind of open it up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think I see that in this, self-care regimen, but I also see it in our eating. If we have too much restriction, then we just push back, or it becomes, I have clients that talk to me about how stressful eating is.
Right.
Because they're overthinking it. They're feeling this burden every day and so confused and stressed, and it just creates so much friction. You know what I'm saying? So
it's just not fun anymore. Food is supposed to be fun, huh?
I really believe it is. And it's so primal, and it's such a, pleasurable activity that obviously, being engaged with our senses is such a gift. We can smell our food, we can taste our food, we can spend time listening to our food cooking in the pan, we can present it in this beautiful way, we can feel the different textures, all these things. They really are integral pieces of pleasure that all weave together. And we've just, obviously, we eat really fast, we eat on the go, we don't slow down enough to even experience our eating.
That's ridiculous.
I know, it's sad, and yet we're such a product of our culture and of this time where there's just so much going on, and it's hard to keep up. So I think it's a natural response, but we can reverse it by bringing some attention to it. Absolutely.
Sue, one time you said to me that let's see if I can phrase this properly. In working with women, you're not so much concerned with the what, but you're more concerned with the how.
You're kind of like hitting all my Boulder Nutrition principles today, which is
I love it. We're just giving people like the inside scoop.
Totally. Well, once again, I think that, let's say that you have this idea that eating potato chips is bad for you.
Right.
I'm not going to comment on that specifically, but more, you sit down to eat the potato chips, and
you're coming from this framework about the potato chips.
Yeah, so you're already setting yourself up for guilt and shame, and that you've done something wrong, and that you're, not a good person, or not a good eater, or unhealthy, or whatever your languaging is. And so you sit down and eat the potato chips, and then, 15 minutes goes by, let's say, and you're done eating the potato chips and you put them away. But in the meantime, you're thinking about the potato chips the whole rest of the afternoon, and how guilty you are, and why did you eat the potato chips? And it's like, the potato chips took 15 minutes, but the thoughts about the potato chips might have taken hours or even days for some
life. Yeah, totally.
And it's like, in those hours and days, you ate the potato chips like 100 more times in your mind.
Right.
And that's the place, I think, where we are very stuck, and we keep beating ourselves up. And I think by that point, I know by that point, that the thoughts about the potato chips, the how about the potato chips, is so much worse than the potential of how bad the potato chips were at all. Like, it completely tips the scale. And now, the potato chips, if they did any damage at all, it was so minor compared to our thoughts about ourselves.
Right.
It's unfortunate, because once again, it comes back to that pillar of how we think and how we talk to ourselves. And that can be pretty damaging.
Right. So how we're showing up, not necessarily what we're eating, but how we're showing up for that. Right.
Absolutely. And, also the way in which we sit down to eat, the rituals around our food, are we eating fast? Are we chewing our food? Are we, able to have pleasure around all of those things? They are so impactful on our digestion. They're so impactful on, our mood for the rest of the day. They're so impactful on our overall health that, I think it's such a big part of the conversation that gets overlooked.
Mm-hmm. So let's just go back to the potato chips for a second, right? Let me just see if I can workshop this through just a little bit. So let's say if we just drop this conception about what the potato chips mean, right? Just drop this idea of what the potato chips mean. And what if we sat down with those potato chips and we ate them slowly, and we ate them lovingly, and we ate them in a way, in a how of showing up, right? Ate them in a way that felt nourishing some part of us. Maybe it was a little girl in us. Maybe it is the rebellious part of us, right? Maybe, right? It would have such a different impact because we don't have that charge of potato chips are bad, right?
Yes, I absolutely agree. And it's interesting that you went there because I have this practice that I teach on my retreats, and it's sort of always like one of the final pieces that, you know, we kind of use as part of the closing of our retreats, which is around pleasure. And actually, instead of potato chips, we use chocolate, because chocolate also, similar to potato chips, is very much a trigger food for people. And, you know, often people tell me about they need chocolate. They feel like, you know, the good girl, bad girl syndrome with chocolate.
Right.
So we do what I call the chocolate meditation. And it's really about showing up, bringing your whole self to the experience, giving yourself full permission to eat the potato chips or the chocolate or whatever it is. Before you decide, before you sit down and eat it, you know, you make that decision, like, if I'm going to eat this, I am going to enjoy it. Because otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah.
I'm going to be eating slow enough and mindful enough to actually experience it. And I'm going to let it nurture me in whatever way it needs to, just like you mentioned, whether it's the little girl in you or the salt, or, you know, maybe you need the magnesium in the chocolate or the antioxidants or whatever it is. Or maybe you're eating a Kit Kat. I don't know, but it's still, you know, you're showing up fully. And then you bring your senses completely to the experience. So you're smelling the chocolate, you're, you know, tasting it melt in your mouth, you're experiencing like the different, you know, contours and the different kinds of shapes and colors of the chocolate. You're experiencing the flavor of the chocolate and all the nuances, just like you would tasting wine. And it's really interesting because people have really interesting experiences doing this, and often we share about it in our retreats. And, you know, it's interesting to hear what comes up for people. You know, recently somebody said, like, I kept eating the chocolate, but I realized I don't even like chocolate. And, you know, it's just like people are having these interesting kind of aha moments, noticing what's truly going on for them versus, you know, what they either are using chocolate for, or, you know, what they're maybe used to doing in their automatic behavior around it. And so I think that absolutely, I think you can show up and give yourself permission to follow the craving, even identify what kind of craving it is, whether it's a physical craving, and sometimes it's an emotional craving. And that's okay. It's just like when we name it and we give it space, it just all of a sudden kind of diffuses the energy, the negative energy around it.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing from you too, it's like they're able to listen to all of this because it's set up in a way, no judgment. There's just no judgment.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if we could have no judgment with our eating or with ourselves.
Like one little bit, right? Just one little bit.
I know. Can you imagine how different life would be? I mean, I notice when I am judging myself a lot, and I notice when I'm even judging myself a little some days, and, you know, we're surely going to keep doing it, and it's surely never going to be perfect, but it's just a really interesting practice and a really interesting, almost like daydream to imagine what would life be like if we were judging ourselves all the time.
Well, but so you've got a point, right? If we can create these little windows of memory, right? Maybe they can start to expand into other areas, right? Like the more,
absolutely.
That's what practice is all about. Hey, you've mentioned a couple times, just even in this conversation, that you've got some retreats going on. There's lots of different ways for people to work with you. What's happening these days?
Yeah. So my kids are getting older, which is providing some space to do more retreats, which has been awesome. I used to only do like 1 or 2 a year, and now this year I have 5 on the schedule.
Wow.
Yeah, so 3 of them are local. I have one coming up in 2 weeks in Colorado, another one in April in Colorado, and I just finished one in September. And then I have a Costa Rica retreat that's all about cooking, food, and yoga for women in January, this January. And then my next big one is Bali in July, which is actually winter in Bali, which sounds funny, but it's the best time to be there because it's not as hot. We actually take Balinese cooking, and we really look into some of the food rituals of the Balinese, which is amazing, along with a lot of their other cultural practices and traditions. Such a beautiful place to visit. And really what I like to do is my retreats are geared towards women, and we just kind of immerse into a lot of what we talked about today. We immerse into eating, cooking, we immerse into our relationship to food. We also do a lot of sort of different aspects of health that we also mentioned, as far as like moving our bodies, giving ourselves some space to slow down, inquiring into our inner worlds. And it's just a really good opportunity to kind of get some perspective and to see where we want to fine tune, or where we want to spend some more attention on ourselves. So that's been really fun for me to expand upon in the last year. And then I have I work here in Boulder with clients at my Boulder office, and remotely as well. So a lot of my sessions are similar to this, on Zoom or Skype or on the phone.
Right.
And then I'm launching a digestive repair program in January, an online program, and that kind of address sort of the root of our health, but also really bringing in the mind-body piece into that program as well. So
that's so great. And when is registration opening for that? So it's going to be, the program starts in January, but are you taking people before, or how's that working?
Yeah, so basically you can find it over at bouldernutrition.com, the kind of pre-registration. And you can definitely sign up and get like a little teasers and tasters of the program between now and January. And then it'll open in the first week of January for registration, and probably be open for about a week. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Excellent. And so, Sue, just remind us, what is your URL for your website so that people can find it easily?
Absolutely. It's actually pretty simple. bouldernutrition.com. There's links there to the online programs, to my private sessions, to the retreat schedule, to my online apothecary, various things like that. Yeah.
And Boulder, it's a B-O-U-L-D-E-R.
Yeah.
Okay.
BOULDER nutrition.com.
Okay, great. Excellent. Sue, thank you so much for coming. I always love connecting with you and hearing your tidbits. You've always got stuff going on. I love it.
Well, thanks. I am just really grateful that you asked me to be here, and it's always fun for us to collaborate. So thanks for thinking of me for this.
Yeah. And if you're looking for a little bit more hormonal support, you can check me out at KristinSavory.com. It's KRISTIN. Savory, SAVORY.com. And I'm available for in-person sessions or Zoom. We can go Zoom, FaceTime, or Skype. All right. We'll see you soon. Bye.